Right. Thank you. It's quite an honor that these many people have showed up, and the Vice Chairman of the State Planning Commission and Mr. Panneerselvan, has been kind enough to give this place for what is a quasi launch of this book. So all of this reminds me of circa 2000, 2001, when I was a third-year undergrad student, right? And at that time, I had a senior who wrote one of these exams called CAT, which, and at that time, I had very little understanding of what that was. And I naively asked him, how do you make the switch from being an engineer to management? This was in 2000, 2001, where, if you belong to a certain strata of society in Tamil Nadu and you attend a certain kind of engineering college, it was like an assembly line into becoming a grad student in the US. I don't know what students these days do, but that's what we did back then. We didn't think, right? So, anyway, my senior at that time said, I really don't want to do Laplace transforms anymore, right? So the reason why I thought of that was because, this book is kind of sort of like that, which is that, if you want serious policy deliberations in terms of which policy works, which doesn't, like Dr. Jayaranjan just told you about, read this wonderful book called The Dravidian Model by Professor Vijay Bhaskar and Kalayarasan, right? Like they go into every single policy prescription, they quantify its outcome, so on and so forth, right? This book does not do that. Right. What this book does is it gives you descriptive statistics of status quo, and which basically means that this tells you where we are and doesn't tell you why we are where we are, right? And the reason why, in my mind, this is kind of important in and of itself is the climate that we have in this country, which is that I don't know how many of you still remember. The greatest fiction of the 21st century in India was the GDP back series calculation. And the chief statistician of the country quit. And we still seem to have carried on as if nothing happened, right? So sort of rooting where we are in terms of a data-centric truth and reality, I thought was a necessary thing for this country. And of course, going forward and proposing what I thought was a genuine solution to it is the reason why this book exists, right? And towards that end, what I want to do is sort of read the epilogue of the book so that, we sort of, instead of me talking about it, I just thought, it would give you a flavor of what the book is. Again, when I was trying to, write a book, I had to write what is a proposal. And at that point, somebody said, write the proposal as if you're writing a review of the book, which I guess, if there are developers in this room, you would also know, which is that, you write the unit test case before you start developing, right? So it's kind of sort of like that. So the epilogue is, again, some version of my own review of my own book, which sort of finds its place in this book again, right? So, and I thought I would read that to give you, the context, and then we'll get into where I sort of think that, I'll answer Mr. Panneerselvan's questions. Right, epilogue. So let me read this, right? All the ways in which, give me a minute. So I have this thing called astigmatism, and I have to have glasses these days. Okay. All the ways in which societies organize themselves are unfair to one or more groups within those societies. The only necessary lever for managing any form of social organization in the modern era, therefore, is one that allows for constant change and one that also, hopefully, transmits the will of the people effectively. India, in the way it was structured after independence, served the purpose of its times, namely a strong union to thwart the possibility of fragmentation and civil war, which was all too common in post-colonial societies of the mid-20th century. That strong union, with its scant regard for states' rights, has possibly outlived its utility. India's states, each larger than many countries, are divergent in every imaginable way. In fact, in ways that extend beyond the scope of equalization in a strongly centralized federal union. They diverge in terms of their governance outcomes, the health of their citizens, the education they offer, and the economic opportunities they provide. Southern India is a different country in that regard. Not only are its development outcomes vastly better than Northern India's, it also happens to be culturally and linguistically distinct from the North. More crucially, in the current structure, Southern India faces a real threat of being reduced to a vassal state if that has little to to a vassal state that has little to no say in how it is governed or taxed. Any solution that works in the long term will have to invert the pyramid of the existing power structure by diffusing the powers currently concentrated with the union. The method of that diffusion, though, must be fair and well thought through. A hasty inversion, one that happens too quickly, despite being the right approach, will only precipitate chaos or violence or both, especially given the linguistic, ethnic, and religious differences between the various regions and peoples of India. There must be an orderly shift of power away from the union government and towards the states and local governments. A re-examination of the structure of democracy and the way in which India's parliament works offers clues as to how the intractable problem could be managed. A move away from the representative model of democracy to a gamified direct democracy with multiple layers of vetoes could be a way out. The cost of such a move will, of course, be the absence of a strong union government that projects strength externally at the cost of its constituent parts. It's a cost worth paying if the reward is enlightened liberalism or a path towards it, with a conservative structure that offers both rectitude in terms of democratic structure and a shot at utilitarian outcomes for the population. An India that is less about the union and more about its constituents and constituencies might be an India more capable of managing its diversity, its divergence, and contradictions. In such a union, people everywhere would feel more equal, right? So that's kind of how the book ends. So what I wanted to... and towards this end, what I wanted to sort of address was, the serious questions that Mr. Panneerselvan raised. And I go through every one of these things, right? Like, I first pass the post system, which, and then find that, the rectitude of that is not good enough for our democracy. Then I examine, proportional representation. Much like he does, I agree that, it's not sufficient. And then, I go through other methods like alternative voting and, the Brazilian versions of effective, where the public gets to decide on how the budgets are formed. And then the Belgian model where, they divorce the legislative calendar from the actual vote on it, so on and so forth, right? After going through all of this is how I arrive at gamified direct democracy. And maybe if what make is that, I quite agree in that, the entire reason why gamified direct democracy exists is to move power back to the people, right, in an orderly fashion, so that, you want a system wherein the move isn't abrupt, like, just heard me read, but it goes through that path down so that people have the actual power. Like, these various committees exist only to manage the transition of power back to the people, right? And hopefully if somebody asks that question in a question answer set. Thank you.